All right. So welcome everyone. Welcome back to Monday and welcome to our final Civic LEAD Series of the spring semester. My name is Christy Walkuski and I apologize. I'm playing double manager here, introducing and working the waiting room. So if I'm clicking over, that's why. I'm Christy Walkuski. I'm director of the Brain Center for Community Engagement. My colleague, Julie Robinson, will be jumping over from another meeting momentarily, so she will be joining us here as well. And I'm so glad to welcome everyone. I know many of you have been with us since the beginning of this series, but I know I did see a few new registrations come in for this session. So want to introduce the series a bit. We started this space over the summer as a way to bring our campus community together. We were discussing issues of race and racial justice in the wake of the killing of George Floyd, which, as we know, sparked a renewed movement for racial justice across the country, and also a re-examination of this within our own campus climate. And so over the course of what's been nearly a year now, we've continued to open this space for conversation and learning together around issues of importance. And so we're all glad that you're here with us today. Just some virtual etiquette. We will remain muted during Dr. Coble's presentation, but please feel free at any point to throw a question in the chat box, and we will definitely have time at the end for your questions as well. And this session is being recorded, so if you want to go back and revisit any of the information or resources that are shared, you can find that on the Civic Leads website or the Brain Center YouTube channel. Finally, just a reminder, as with all of our events, this event is rooted in the expectations of BW's community standards of conduct. So we expect this to be a space where we can engage empathetically, respectfully, and thoughtfully together. So our spring series, as many of you know, kicked off with Dr. Jason Kyber exploring white supremacy and domestic terrorism. Last week, Dr. Copeland and Dr. Monahan helped us continue this examination through the lens and influence of social media. And we're thrilled to welcome Dr. Kelly Coble to share his insights today on how misinformation is winning hearts and minds, and perhaps the question that we've really all been asking ourselves, which is, what can we do about this? So Dr. Coble comes from the Department of Philosophy, and we're thrilled to have him here today. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you, Dr. Coble.
Thanks so much, Christy. I'm really grateful for the invitation and the opportunity to participate in this really great forum. Honored also to be part of such a great series, having been able to catch a lot of them, though not nearly as many as I've wanted to. So I'm going to go ahead and share the all-powerful PowerPoint. That's how we do things, and make sure that it's in presentation mode here. And then we're off. So there it is. My hard drive is a little sick, so things are moving slowly, but it looks like it's working. So, I don't know about you, but I'm frankly terrified of the world our children are growing up in. It's a world in which a cocktail of lies, half-truths, delusions, and conspiracy theories lead people to storm the US Capitol building or refuse a COVID-19 vaccination. And often I feel like I have no idea what to do about this. The philosophers would say that the problem we're facing right now involves the social epistemology of misinformation. Okay, so that's sort of the theme. And the issue is, what's leading people to believe in things that are false? What's accounting for the seduction? And what can we do about it? And that implies that we can do something about it. And of course, we always can do something about it. How successful we can be is another question. And as Christy Walkuski indicated, this is a Civic LEAD Series talk, and I think it's important, therefore, to foreground the serious threat to democracy that this trend, perhaps, of misinformation, we'll talk about whether it's happening more now than before, but I think there's a sense in which it's happening differently and more prominently than it ever has, perhaps, before. A functioning democracy rests on the assumption that people can make good choices. And misinformation gives people a false picture of what promotes their own interests. Even now, if you poll most people in Western countries A majority will say they disagree that climate change poses an urgent threat. And significant minorities even doubt the basic science, even still. All of these people, though, value the preservation of the world for their children, right? So we are dealing with issues that really do threaten our well-being. So my notes. And of course, we're also living in a world, climate change is one thing, COVID-19 is even more prominent in our minds right now. We have a good easy 25% of the US population who believes that COVID was either it doesn't exist or it was started deliberately. All sorts of conspiracy theories related to COVID, conspiracy theories related to vaccinations, and so on. So these are very serious issues, obviously, and it matters a great deal that misinformation is so widespread. Yeah, so the threat to our democracy was what that slide was supposed to indicate, and so is this one. So, by the way, misinformation and disinformation, right?
Hey, Kelly, I'm so sorry to interrupt. We just see your very first slide. I don't know if it's in presentation mode for us.
Okay, let me fix that. Slide. Yeah, that's okay. Great. Yeah, let's fix that. So now you should see democracy under threat.
Yep, perfect.
Okay, thanks, Christy. So, yeah, I lost where we were headed here, but sorry. Okay, let's move. Oh yeah, I did want to say something before we move to the Cambridge Analytica scandal. This is just distinguishing terms for ourselves. So disinformation versus misinformation. I don't know if anybody wants to try writing in the chat box what the distinction is between disinformation and misinformation. Yeah, this is the idea, right? Exactly. So, misinformation can sort of just happen when folklore spreads because people buy it and they spread it and they believe it. Misinformation can, of course, just be mistaken, error. But exactly, disinformation is intentional. And so it's a form of what's the word here? Deception, right? This is lying or fraud. If we're talking about disinformation, then we know that somebody knows that it's not true. And the person who's ultimately responsible either for initiating or disseminating or spreading or encouraging the misinformation would be engaged in disinformation. And so the same information, which is false, is in a sense simultaneously misinformation, and if it's intentionally being spread, disinformation. So often in, the words are being used sort of interchangeably, but there is that difference in the definition, and that matters. And what we're seeing, of course, with a lot of the developments that concern us is the way in which disinformation plays an important role in the spread of misinformation. So excellent. So we remember, I think, the 2018, this is really when the scandal broke out. The Guardian and the New York Times first published this back in March 2018. So several years, it seems like a lifetime ago, maybe. Right, this was when Facebook essentially harvested and sold to Cambridge Analytica all sorts of data from millions of user Facebook profiles. It turned out to be 87 million. It was underreported initially when it broke out. And remember that Cambridge Analytica is a political data analytics firm, and the psychographic data that was harvested was used to deliver pro-Trump material, right, to the people who were thought to be the good optimal targets for this kind of information. So note that politics, I think it was Clinton who said it's the economy, stupid. Well, often when we're talking about disinformation, it's politics, stupid, right, is how we would put that. And misinformation too is often political. So what the Cambridge Analytica case revealed to us, okay, first of all, so 70 likes, if you have access to 70 of a Facebook user's likes, right, then you know more about that person, at least from certain point, for certain purposes, you know more about that person than their friends do. At 150 likes, you know more about them than their parents do. And with 300 likes, you know more about them than probably they themselves know, right? So it's a powerful kind of information. And we can then use that information to create these social bots, these algorithms, right, that are then participating in social media and spreading, fake news, right? And this is indeed disinformation, right? So social bots, as they're often called, although people usually just refer to them as bots, are part of this social media landscape we now live in. I thought that this study was particularly eye-opening when I discovered it. This was not long after the scandal. MIT scientists primarily, so that was Soroush Fazougi, right? And her, Soroush, actually, I think his colleagues, I'm not sure actually about the gender. So Fazougi and colleagues anyway did this analysis of Twitter cascades, right? And they looked at both the depth of a Twitter tweet and the spread of a Twitter tweet. And they also looked at sort of the rates of growth of these cascades. And what they found is that falsehood just travels much faster than the truth, farther than the truth, both in terms of breadth and depth of Twitter shares. And that the false political content outperforms other types of false content, right? And the question, well, why would false information spread so much more virulently than true information? And of course, it has to do with sort of the content of the false information. False information, unlike the truth, can be sort of designed to manipulate us psychologically. So the sort of novelty and the attention-grabbing character of it and the emotional response it elicits is what appears to be driving this, this process, this sort of social process. So I wanted to try to say something a little bit philosophical here to start out with. And this is, when we're looking at conspiracy theories and falsehoods, hoaxes, misinformation, conspiracy theories, Jason Khyber had a great presentation on white nationalism. Often it's very useful, and social scientists in particular do good work in this area, to adopt this sort of standpoint. And it's the standpoint of the non-participant observer, right? We analyze what's making people tick, who's spreading the disinformation, who's being suckered into the misinformation. Who are these conspiracy theorists? What sorts of people are involved in them? What's the connection between political extremism and conspiracy theorists? So there are many people who are, believers in all sorts of conspiracy theories, but they're not political extremists, right? But there are very few political extremists who don't embrace some conspiracy theory, right? So there's obviously these kinds of associations that are significant. One of the worries I always have when we analyze misinformation, the unsavory political movements that work with misinformation, white nationalism, for example, it's important to look at these things. The worry I have is we adopt the standpoint of the non-participant observer only. The weakness of this standpoint is that it leaves ourselves out of the picture. It objectifies the subject matter. To objectify socially is also to other. So we're talking about othering when we're objectifying. We need to do the objectifying because you have to in order to do the analysis. I'm not saying you shouldn't objectify, that we shouldn't adopt this standpoint of sort of putting something under a microscope and examining it. But it can be a problem, in my opinion, because when we're only adopting this kind of standpoint, our own embeddedness in the reality we're dealing with drops out of the picture. And we have a tendency, again, to objectify, which is to other the subject matter of our analysis. But othering, if you think about it, is part of the dynamic of the thing that we find so dangerous, because these political groups are sort of rabidly othering their own enemies and culprits and opponents, right? So it's something to be aware of. We need to imagine that the people who are suckered into conspiracy theories and extremism are human beings, much like us, and that we therefore are potentially vulnerable to similar things. If we somehow fall into the wrong, community of people somehow, we could too be suckered into it, right? So understanding that we're also involved in the world, and when we are scientifically observing white nationalism, we're also people, human beings who are taking positions ourselves politically. We are participants in this very world we're analyzing, and we're involved in it. And we are, so the vulnerabilities are within as well as without. And sometimes seeing that our own subjectivity gives us access to what we're looking at, this view from within, if you want, it can be helpful. And it's the sort of thing that philosophers often attend to. This is the tradition of European phenomenology, for example, where we sort of try to take very seriously the fact of our involvement. So this can help make sure that certain kinds of inappropriate moral responses don't come out of these objective descriptions of unsavory political developments that we see around us. So anyway, that's okay. So I'm going to try a poll everywhere, and it looks like it might be some kind of disaster. I've never activity unavailable now, so that's a problem. So I had a poll everywhere set up, but I've never really tried to do this in a slideshow, and that's how I roll when it really matters. Do it without. So it's saying the activity unavailable. I had activated it, so try logging in as activity owner. So I'm just going to, unfortunately, kind of drop the, so let's see, let me try this. So right now it's not in presentation mode, and but you can kind of get a view of the questions that I was trying to put into the poll. And would it be a lot cooler if you could do the poll? I don't know if it's possible to try. So I've got the information there if you want to try to get into the poll. So if you have a phone handy, so.
Stick your hand in a bowl of cockroaches, or
yeah, okay, so let's go back. Yeah, right. So what's your call there, Jill?
I'm stabbing the photograph.
Yeah, so people are stabbing the photograph, for example. That was sort of the first question. So the other one, would you put a coin in your mouth that was on the pavement, or would you sleep in laundered pajamas that Charles Manson had worn, right? Would you ride in a speeding car without a seatbelt? Or would you yell out, "I hope to die tomorrow," 3 times? When you have to make an important decision, do you try to get all the info and weigh the pros and cons carefully, or do you go with your gut feeling? And if you want to buy a lottery ticket, sorry, something's going on with my, do you go to a convenience store that has never sold a winning ticket but has no lines? Or do you go to a store that sold 2 winning tickets in the past 3 years but has a long line, right? And this set of questions are meant to capture whether you're more of an intuitionist or you're more of a rationalist, right? And I obviously did not create this survey. The scholar who did is Eric Oliver. And what I'm going to go ahead and do is resume the show and share it. Sorry, it's try to do it this way. So do you see a slide and show presentation now?
Yep, looks great.
Great. Okay. So maybe hopefully now from now on will be good. So yeah, so the intuitionist and the rationalist, right? And you know, it sounds fairly, and this is Eric Oliver, and you can see under individual psychology, Eric Oliver's intuitionists and rationalists. It sounds like it's okay. Okay, I'm an intuitionist, you're a rationalist, it's all good. But honestly, I think the subtext is intuitionists engage in magical thinking, right? They believe that there are causal forces which are unseen. Who knows? Luck could be such a force, something else. And these are unseen, you know, there's a lot of unseen causal forces. We have them in the sciences, right? Gravity, for example, right? So it's not just that they're unseen causal forces, but they're unseen causal forces that run afoul of what we think we know about the world based on empirical observation and so on, right? So magical thinking is what intuitionists are engaging in. And truthfully, I don't think it's a good thing to engage in. Right? I think we should be rationalists, therefore. It's fascinating to really explore these things. Rationalists, on this definition, on Oliver's definition, are more prone to depression. And people who suffer from depression are far less vulnerable to all sorts of cognitive biases and heuristics that people who are a little bit better, people who have better mental states are more prone to. It's an interesting dilemma, actually. And sometimes I really wonder if trying to engage in the right kind of epistemological humility has a psychological effect, that it exacts a certain kind of psychological toll. Many of the kinds of things we need to do in order to combat misinformation may be psychologically taxing for us, and that's a real issue, and it's part of the reason why combating misinformation could be so tricky. But one way to look at the things that are causing misinformation to spread is to see, first of all, that our human nature, right, makes us vulnerable to all sorts of things. We have a profound need for cognitive closure, and we're susceptible to all sorts of cognitive biases and heuristics, right? A heuristic is a shortcut. Presumably, you know, our brains evolved to engage in a lot of these shortcuts because they solve problems in our evolutionarily salient environment. They solved problems for us, these shortcuts. The problem is increasingly in our modern environment, these shortcuts are causing trouble, right? But there are also variations among people. So again, Eric Oliver's distinction between intuitionists and rationalists, and people to varying degrees. So when we talk about virtues and vices, what we're talking about are things that are within our control. Whether I am an intuitionist or a rationalist may have to do with my personality type, my genes, who knows, epigenetic background or something. But intellectual virtues and vices, at least in theory, are things we can cultivate intellectual virtues. We can do something about this. We can practice them. First of all, we have to know what they are. We have to aim for them. We have to care about them. And then we have to very deliberately cultivate them. And it's much harder than it looks. And many of us suck in these areas. And our intellectual virtues are fairly undercultivated, arguably. Try to come back to that point. But then finally, we have sort of our social and ecological psychology. In other words, there are larger social dynamics. I mean, they connect to human nature that are going to be relevant. When we're living in times of uncertainty, of profound political disagreement, which generates uncertainty, who do I believe? When we have frightening things happening, climate change frightens some of us. COVID-19 is very frightening. Other things are frightening that are going on, right? Those things create motives to engage in wishful thinking, right? Our online environment is enormous here. I want to say more about it before I stop jabbering. I already need to move quickly here. And I want to say something about that affective polarization. Ian Garr has, I think, coined this affective polarization. I think it works together with many of the other issues we're looking at. So need for cognitive closure, though, is in many ways the root sin that sort of makes all the rest possible. So just quickly looking at human nature, accidentally over. So just because he's a hero of mine, Charles Sanders Peirce, 1877 essay, The Fixation of Belief. And the question is, why do people believe things, right? Why do we believe things at all? Why not be completely skeptical and hold almost no beliefs? It's sort of theoretically possible. And the reason is obvious. Doubt sucks, right? It's dissatisfying and we don't like it. We try to get away from it. And the way to do it is to believe something, right? So that's why we believe stuff fundamentally, according to Peirce. And as he says, the sole object of inquiry is the settlement of opinion. In other words, the reason why we look for an answer to resolve our doubt is because we can't stand the doubt, not because we're interested in truth, right? We may fancy that this is not enough for us and that we seek not merely an opinion, but a true opinion. But put this fancy to the test and it proves groundless. For as soon as a firm belief is reached, we are entirely satisfied, whether the belief be true or false. And, all the psychologists who have been conducting studies and experiments in the meantime have only really confirmed the truth of this. Think of confirmation bias, this all-powerful force in our human lives. Confirmation bias, right? The sort of root of these problems. It's all about not having to change what I believe. So interesting idea. So we have this intolerance for uncertainty, and that grows when times are challenging. It only grows. COVID, right? 50% of respondents say they're stressing out right now because of COVID, right? We know all about that. So there are all sorts of narratives, though, that become appealing when we're in scary situations, when there is uncertainty. And by the way, COVID has been full of uncertainty. If you go back, I mean, there's so much uncertainty, right? And there has been since the beginning, even with the masks at the beginning. Remember all the chaos about whether to wear the mask initially. So when things are scary, what we need is to get away from randomness. So randomness says, yeah, there are reasons why COVID-19 has emerged and spread as a pandemic, but there's also a degree of sort of randomness too. It didn't have to happen. It just sort of did. And nobody wanted it to happen. It's, there's not some evil genius behind the scenes, but that's not satisfying. Right? We need, it's a scary situation, so we need a solution to our scary situation. But psychologically, the solution means you need to find a culprit. So there has to be somebody behind this. Either they've created the virus, or they're creating the conspiracy that makes people believe that there's this virus, which doesn't exist, or it's safe, or whatever it is that people might believe, right? So we need a culprit. And everybody knows who the culprit is. It's them, the people I already basically hate and detest, whether it's those libs or, the establishment or these corporations, the pharmaceutical companies, who knows? But it's obvious who the culprit is, pretty much. It's them, right? And what we need to do, therefore, is simply identify the culprit and punish them. That's how we solve our problems. We identify culprits and punish them. And that is a universal attitude. I see it in the progressive wings and the other wing, this interest in identifying culprits and punishing culprits. And many problems transcend the culprits that there might be. They're more complex, and we often don't like to explore those aspects of the problems. So really quick, so this is about who can answer this question first. So if you can get the answer and put it in chat first, you're the winner, okay? Right, a bat and a ball cost $1.10 total. Some of you are familiar with this. Students who've been in a class of mine, for example. The bat costs $1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost? So we have our answer. Simple math, quick. The trick is to be able to get an answer quickly. Yeah, Clara already knew about it. Okay, so right, so the ball costs 5 cents, right? That's the solution, but that's and it's not a difficult solution to reach, and most of us have the math necessary to enable us to find the solution. But most of us think that the ball costs 10 cents, right? Honestly. And the issue is that we're attracted to the simplicity and the ease with which our brain convinces us that the answer is 10 cents, right? And this goes, Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow is a genuine classic. If you haven't read it, get an education, read the book. It's really, of any of these discussions of cognitive biases and heuristics, that's really the big book. So we have these two cognitive systems on this theory, and there's a lot to support that theory. System one, again, the heuristics, the shortcuts, the intuitive and instinctive responses. System two is where you have to do the math, right? And it's uncomfortable and it's a drag. And even when you can do it, you'd rather not do it. And the problem, therefore, is that very often we just rely on system one because of the ease of use, and we'd rather not deal with system two. This is all happening subconsciously. We're not making deliberate choices. But it really gets screwy here because there's another way in which system one and system two are working together that's a little odd, and that is that system one will lead us to intuitions and answers that they don't fit what system two is telling us. And so what do? We don't revise our system one answer, we revise our system two answer. How do you do that? By engaging system two. It's hard work. Now you have to come up with some kind of special pleading or an ad hoc argument to save the intuition. This is all happening inside subconsciously, right? So this sort of motivated reasoning or twisting ourselves into pretzels, hard work, hard cognitive work, but by golly, we're going to do it because we can't stand uncertainty and we can't stand changing that intuition. It just feels too right? So kind of a weird thing. So some relevant biases and heuristics here. We're still talking about human nature and my thing is going on too long. Apophenia, right? This is where you're seeing patterns. We all do it. Pareidolia is a more visual version of this, but we find patterns we're supposed to, right? You need to in order to survive, but sometimes we see too many patterns, or we see patterns where there's really just randomness. Like some people still think that Paul McCartney isn't dead, that he wasn't murdered. But those people obviously haven't paid attention to the cover of, Sgt. Pepper Lonely Hearts Club Band, where we can find proof that Paul McCartney was murdered. And I don't know who the imposter is who's currently pretending to be Paul McCartney, right? So we have the illusory truth effect, which is a fancy word for when something is repeated enough times, we believe it. There's a part of my brain, I'm sure, that believes that Hillary is a crook and needs to be locked up. It's got to be right. Some part of my brain, I'm sure, is persuaded of it. I'm repressing it, but it's got to be there. Just because I've heard it so many times, and that is a very powerful effect. Belief echoes. When we have an emotional response to something that's not true, it sticks with us, right? Again, the non-rational parts of the brain don't really care that you later learned that it's false. There's something deep about that emotional response, and that's going to continue to motivate your behavior. We all suck at updating beliefs. We all suck at reasoning. It's true also among scientists, and even, I mean, everybody knows that philosophers suck at it, but I know everybody thinks scientists are immune to this stuff. They aren't. At least they aren't when they step out of the area where they're actually doing research, their actual field. They're pretty reliable. Step outside it just a little bit, and they're just as idiotic as the rest of us, right? So PhD is not a vaccination against disinformation. So we need to develop some intellectual virtues. And the most important one, and it's the most difficult, is this sort of epistemological humility, right? And this is recognizing that we don't know, that we don't have all the information, that we don't have all the expertise, and therefore that there's some uncertainty often. And living with uncertainty is part of intellectual. So lack of intellectual humility, right, is known to make people more vulnerable to conspiracy theories and other forms of misinformation. So we need to cultivate these virtues: intellectual humility, tolerance for uncertainty. Almost impossible for us. Socrates made a career, right, of disabusing people of what they claimed to know, pointing out to them, you don't really know what you think you know. And it's really important that you know that you don't know what you thought you knew. And he was hated for it, and executed for it. People can't stand uncertainty. And yet we've got to learn how to manage it, because there's a lot of it in our environment, and the need for cognitive closure causes trouble. We need to be cautious when we receive information. Skeptical. Skeptics, that can be weirdo stuff like climate skeptics, right? So skepticism also needs to be skeptical of the skepticism. There's a kind of recurring issue here. It's just a general caution. The point is not to disbelieve everything you hear. It's just to be cautious, to be skeptical, to hold open the possibility that the full picture is still not being given to us. Open-mindedness, we're all open-minded. It's easy to be open-minded. I'm open-minded. Why isn't anybody else open-minded? Open-minded means that I have to be willing to give up all sorts of convictions, beliefs, and assumptions. What? No, I'm not into that. You're telling me to change what I think? No, but that's what open-minded actually requires. And we need to be really hyper vigilant about details that contradict our assumptions, right? Because that's what confirmation bias won't let us do, right? It just pays attention to the stuff that conforms to our assumptions. We need to learn and cultivate this practice of attending to looking for the details that poke holes in the assumptions we've already formed. So really quick, this social media environment, it's doing something that I don't know if we always discuss this. So I think it's polluting our social lives with politics, right? So we're not spending as much time in the flesh encounters. We're spending more time online in social media, right? So if we acknowledge that, then the question is, what's the character of our interactions and relationships online? And often politics is highly salient, animating and structuring these relationships we're having with people, relatives, and friends. So politics, there's not something wrong with politics. We want more engagement and activism and so on, but maybe it shouldn't be infecting our relationships to the degree that it appears to be due to social media as the medium of our interactions, right? And we see this, and it's been discussed plenty, the sort of tribal epistemology. So the main thing is we need to figure out whose team people are on. And we sort of virtue signal, I have the correct beliefs, accept me into your club, and those are the bad people. And we almost use posts as a way of, detecting what team people are on, who to avoid, and so on. But that's not political engagement, and that's not human relationships worth anything. That's garbage. That's just garbage. And much of our lives are consumed by it, I think, when we're on social media. And so this is this affective polarization idea. This is the idea that I don't disagree with the policy or something like that because I have a rational dispute with it. It's that I hate your guts, right? Because you are evil, because you are one of them, right? And you are a lost cause. You're hypocritical, selfish, and closed-minded. I will not socialize with you. And if my son marries one of you, that'll be the end of it, right? And we know the Pew Research, right? People, marrying across religion, across race, people are more open to that than ever before. But marrying across, one of them, the political thing, that's become huge. So the other related thing, and believe it or not, we are just about. So, okay, I'm gonna go ahead and close because we're out of time. We know that our social media environment also makes it harder for us to function cognitively. So we become more susceptible to the mechanisms of disinformation just because we're sort of cognitively depleted. And that's important. By the way, our work environments are also poisoned by these environments, right? If you're interested in productivity, these environments are not helping. So I did have a slide about what we can do about it. There was some things there, but I'm going to go ahead and stop it. Thanks for your patience, and sorry it went on so long.
Thank you, Kelly. That was wonderful, and I appreciate the concluding slide. And I'll remind everyone that slide and all these resources will be available. I know I made a lot of notes of some reading I need to go back to do, so thank you for that. We do have some time, though, so I want to open it up. If folks have questions, feel free to raise your hand or unmute yourself, put questions in the chat. Any of those ways will work just fine.
Well, while people are thinking and maybe typing, Dr. Coble, I would be very interested to see the slide that you actually skipped over at the end, the one about what can we do about it. I think that for me is the piece I'm most eager to hear about. So, oh, somebody else, Jill, we think alike, don't we? Or if you just want to talk about it, either way.
Yeah, I'm so slow here with all of this. I wish I was faster. So maybe I'll read off the slide for now. So when we're talking about conspiracy theories, there are the diehards, and we know that you can't persuade them that their conspiracy theory is false. There's no way to do it. That doesn't mean that people who are diehards will always believe that theory. Often life will intervene and things will happen. Sometimes reality bites and they'll drop it. But who we should focus on are the conspiracy curious, right? And that's many of us maybe most people are conspiracy curious. We do sort of mistrust the establishment. Many of us do in academia, for example. And that makes us at least curious about some of these conspiracies. And maybe that's even a good thing. But though that's the group, and it's the majority, where there's still hope. We can reach people and have rational discussions. We can also just make people aware of disinformation techniques, for example, the kinds of things that come up online, right? So if something is very provocative or expresses urgency in the message, that's a dead giveaway. So, and that can be part of education, right? Where we teach students skills at detecting BS online. There's Stanford had put together a really good, it's a few years old now and a little obsolete. Also, I do think that the social media, the algorithms they use to present things to us, YouTube and so on, that there can be a greater deference given to more mainstream sources of news, right? People actually do, by and large, trust mainstream news more than these hyper-partisan fake sites. And if our social media algorithms gave more prominence to more reliable sources of news, that maybe could have an effect. I think we do need to promote greater tolerance for uncertainty. You know, one other quick thing is we need to restore trust in our institutions. Many people don't trust institutions because our institutions aren't very trustworthy. The invasion of Iraq, for example, you know, Bush administration basically promoted a conspiracy theory. You know, Hussein was in cahoots with Al-Qaeda, you know, completely false. You know, government response to the financial crisis, you know, the profound inequities of that response. And going back to the events that initiated this series, right? The violence against Black bodies is obviously not good if we're talking about trusting our institutions. So, and that's really hard. How do you restore trust in institutions, right? Looks like Judy had her hand up.
Judy, do you want to unmute or put your question in the chat?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah. Hey, Judy.
In teaching American foreign policy, we would contrast decision-making styles of various presidents. So when we got to Trump and he was asked about his decision-making style, he said, "I trust my gut. It's smarter than most people's brains." And that was all there was to it. But it fits perfectly with your presentation, and I think it's a good illustration of the differences that you've talked about.
Right. And George W., I think, also made a comment similar to that at one point, right?
Well, I wasn't as aware of that, but I'll take your word for it.
Yeah, I think so. But certainly Trump is sort of that on steroids. I'm looking at the, yeah, you know, sorry, let me, so I was just reading Denise's, I skipped Kerrigan, and it's great to see you, Kerrigan, again, or sort of see you. Yeah, I mean, uncertainty, it's really complex. Maybe uncertainty is itself part of the problem. Is that what Kerrigan is, I think, trying to indicate here, that the uncertainty, you're right. I mean, the uncertainty is what's motivating people to get that cognitive closure at any cost. So the issue is, can people be made to be more tolerant? And it's difficult. And Denise indicates, you know, I mean, it is a cultural thing. We tend to valorize people who have conviction. People who are certain. I mean, we celebrate that. We celebrate go with your gut, right? Honestly, I mean, we think that's the sign of a good leader, and so that is a cultural value that we could change. I know, Margaret, that yeah, people who believe in a conspiracy theory, that it's very similar in many ways to subscribing to a religion, right? The dynamics are very similar in terms of, the group that's formed, what's the word? The unfalsifiability of the conspiracy. There's anything you could say against the conspiracy theory becomes evidence that supports the conspiracy theory, which is very similar to how religion works.
The Jonestown, remember, and drinking the Kool-Aid, that whole example.
Yeah, right. I mean, I don't have a lot of, I haven't done research in that kind of stuff, but for sure, right? And I know QAnon had some of that cult element to it, right? Yeah, instant gratification too. And the velocity of information. Yeah, I mean, it's great. We have this gate through which news can travel very quickly, and all the junk goes through the same gate. How do you, and that's sort of the big dilemma, right? How do you keep the gate sort of open? And it's really the big social dilemma we're facing, is we don't want to shut down free speech and access to information. That's totalitarianism. On the other hand, how do we do this better with the misinformation? It's a dilemma without an easy answer.
Are there other questions? Dr. Coble, are there other things you were hoping to share that you didn't get a chance to?
No, I just wanted to plug. So, we've had, I think our challenge today is social media and the political form in which misinformation takes place. But if you go back to the 70s, it was a world full of kooky things, ESP and telekinesis and faith healing. I mean, we still have some of these things, right? Faith healing. And these were huge. They were on network television all day. My mother, poor thing, watched daytime television much of her life and was, listening to these people on talk shows, Uri Geller bending keys and spoons because he had these powers. And there was a huge campaign, Carl Sagan, other people who were trying to say, look, these people are frauds and crooks. We can show you that they're fake. Maybe the big one here is James Randi. And I would really plug this film called An Honest Liar. It's about James Randi. It's a really, I think, useful film, An Honest Liar, about the life of James Randi. And he dedicated himself to exposing frauds. He wrote a lot of books, but he was also on Johnny Carson and did the daytime television circuit. And he brilliantly exposed fake, like faith healers. It's not that he said they're wrong and we know that that's not science. He would actually expose them in these brilliant ways. And maybe if we think about, we need to not forget Alex Jones and Sandy Hook, maybe. We need to remember that people like Alex Jones, who has admitted I was suffering from psychosis. And it was my own media environment in his defense, and he lost the parents, the defamation suit against Alex Jones of InfoWars, right? The whole gun control thing, and when the Sandy Hook events took place, Alex Jones was spreading the idea that the whole thing was just made up, that it hadn't really happened. He has pleaded in court that he was suffering from psychosis. Maybe if we're able to have enough cultural memory to shine the spotlight on these goons, because I suspect the Sandy Hook thing has largely died. I don't know for sure. And maybe, remember Alex Jones, that kind of thing, because we can see the frauds sometimes as they recede a bit into the past. And maybe I don't know. I don't think we hear about the trial and the sorts of things Alex Jones was admitting in his defense. So I think we could do a lot more as a culture to fight disinformation than we seem to be doing. I know we're out of time, but James Randi, An Honest Liar, it's worth watching.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Coble, for a fascinating presentation. I know that you really caused me to think about my own thoughts and behaviors when it comes to information that I'm taking in. And thank you all for attending. This is our last currently in our spring series, but as we say after every presentation, we are always open to additional ideas for talks, and we will we'll consider those as they come our way, and we will be looking for a summer series as well. So thank you for attending, and thank you for presenting, Dr. Coble. Have a great evening.
You too. Thank you so much for the invitation, Julie. I really appreciate it.